Welcome to Church Planting and Renewal Conversations. I'm Chris Vogel, Director of Next Gen Pastors, and serve M&A as the Director of Ecosystem Development. It would be unimaginable for any of one to start a career after which you've spent years in preparation, doled out more money for your training and education and degree than you'll make in the first year or so, and then not have any real practical experience in that field. Yet that is what can happen to someone as they consider going into the ministry. That seminarian may, with visions of being a preacher like Spurgeon, a theologue like Calvin, with the resolve of Knox, venture forth to shepherd the flock. Now, that might be true in a strange world of pastors, but it would be even more so for church planters who would add to all of that the vision of following in the footsteps of the Apostle Paul himself. But that planter, having little or no experience in a church plant, starts something from scratch and forms the vision, gathers people, shares the gospel, and out of nothing imagines a church will be birthed. But it really does raise the question of how do we prepare pastors for what lies ahead? We need a place for those in pastoral formation to learn, experience, and grow as pastors, especially though before they finish the degree and seek to be ordained, and as they're beginning that search for their first call. That's why we have internships. Well, how can we do that in today's world as we are now faced in this time of quarantine? But it's true all across the board and other times as well. How can we provide the experience, the needed experience, to discern where God would have them serve? Well, today we are so glad to have with us a number of folks who have some experience and insights and have come up with some plans, and we're glad you're joining with us. First, we have Bob Sawyer. Bob is the director of the Christ the King Boston Church Planting Center. And that Church Planting Center seeks to see healthy and growing congregations for every neighborhood in and around Boston by planting churches, developing leaders for church planting, and exploring innovative approaches to church planting among a diverse people of the city of Boston. With him is Omar Ortiz. He's the Leadership Development Director at Christ the King Church in Boston. Christ the King is a multi-site, multi-ethnic church with congregations throughout greater Boston. They seek gospel renewal of the city by planting churches throughout greater Boston. Two of them are part of a larger group, the New England Church Planting Network. And it was formed back in 2019 to bring life to the long-standing vision to establish PCA churches in the New England states, churches that reflect the deep theological and cultural engagement of a particular place by serving and knowing its people, and by bringing the transforming power of the historic Christian faith. And then last but not least, Ted Powers, likewise no stranger either to church planting. Ted is the director of the Midwest Alliance, a movement dedicated to planting PCA churches in the 14 Midwestern states. He also coaches planters and pastors and is the director of church planting for Central Indiana Presbytery. He is, of course, the former church planting coordinator for M&A, where he was involved in identifying, assessing, training, and coaching church planters, working with other M&A staff and leaders, network directors, and alike. Well, welcome. We're glad you are with us at this time. We'll say to the audience, you will see we've got the Q&A box and the chat box that are available on this, so please make use of them. We'll keep our eye on both. The Q&A box is probably a little bit more robust, but either one is fine, and we'll all be taking a look at it. After our time, will probably be in a day or two, I will get an email out to all of you who have attended and have any of the documents that we're talking about here. So again, guys, welcome. We're glad you're with us here. And so I want to just start off with a question. Any of you can answer it. We're talking here about virtual internships, a summer virtual internship. Only in a world like we are facing today would we ever imagine we're talking about a virtual internship. There could be jokes all around there, and I won't even begin to try to make them. But before we talk about virtual, to talk a little bit about what you would say an internship is. If you're talking the physical one we normally think of, what have you seen in the past? what's involved? What experience would they get in those? Anyone?
Well, I guess I could jump in on that one in the sense that we've been doing internships for a long time with M&A. A number of years ago, working with Jim Hatch at the various seminary campuses around the country, Covenant Seminary, the RTS campuses, the Westminsters, that kind of thing. We would have these readiness seminars, which were designed to be kind of like a mini assessment center for seminary students. And the idea was just to begin to get a feel for who might be interested in church planting down the road, to begin to maybe plant that idea, and then from that, give some people some experience. So if you went through the readiness seminar and got a certain level of encouragement to move forward, then resources were provided, scholarship funds were provided to do an on-site internship. And so working with Jim Hatch, we would help guys connect to various places around the country where for 8 weeks or 10 weeks, they could be connected with a church planter on site and gain some experience in church planting and get a real direct personal experience of what is involved in church planting. They could be a real asset to the church planter. They could help with some outreach events and discipling activities. They could preach if they had some events going on, all of that kind of thing. And the idea was to give them some idea if the church planting might be for them. And that was something that went very, very well. And so as we went into this summer, the idea was, well, how do we, in light of these circumstances, keep that going? What would that maybe look like here? Okay. And we were struggling with trying to figure that out. And then I saw what they were doing in New England. And so he said, this can be done. And so I could just turn it over to those guys.
Okay. Yeah, and we'll get into the summer aspect. But Bob, you were going to say, I mean, now, have you been doing internships up in Boston at CDK prior?
We have, very much in line with what Ted just described. And I would just add that the internships for us have been a great way, not only to help provide some training for interns, but also to expose them to our city, to expose them to our particular context, and see if New England would be the kind of place that ultimately they'd want to come and plant a church. So, part of it has been training, but a lot of it's been exposure too, to different ministry in a different place, in a different way. And that's been really useful for us.
Good. All right. Well, okay, there are a lot of terms we throw around, and sometimes you hear intern, apprentice, resident. Do you see a distinction in those terms, or are they just depending on whoever's using them, they define them as they might? So, I hear about church planting apprenticeships, church planting interns. What's different audience? What would you say?
In our context here in New England, what we've done is we have used those terms, the terms apprentice and resident, pretty much interchangeably. What I like about the term resident is that it really evokes the imagery of a medical resident, someone who has finished their education and is actually doing the ministry. They're actually doing the work that they've been training to do. Interns for us are people who are still in the midst of their theological education, and they're testing the waters or trying to get practical experience. That's how we've, in New England and in Boston, have tried to differentiate those terms.
Good. So
a little bit, being a resident is kind of like an overall encompassing thing with a residency. And you can have various expressions, and some of that can be an apprenticeship, which can almost be interchangeable. But a residency can be someone who is maybe already an experienced pastor, even has planted churches before, comes on board a church and is with them for a year or two before they take a group out and go plant. Mm-hmm. But it could also be an apprentice who is training to plant his first church. He's never done that before and needs to grow in certain areas, skill development, whatever. And then an intern is just what Omar would say. So I just see resident as more of an overarching umbrella term.
Okay. And so in this case, we're talking about summer internships. We're talking more earlier in the formation stage of pastoral formation. So usually a seminary student somewhere in that period, more or less. Okay,
Right.
good. Well, the question then for now, we're talking about virtual apprenticeships. You know, Omar, I think I first heard about it when I got the info what you guys were doing.
Mm-hmm.
So the obvious question is, what are you thinking? We're also be quarantined, you know, and aren't we spending enough time on calls like this? No, what was behind your quick pivot and move in light of the circumstances we're in?
We had already been in conversation. So Christ the King has been doing internships for several years.
Mm-hmm.
And we had already been in conversation with the New England Church Planting Network to work together with them, with some of the interns that they had. And so as a result, we had already mapped out a lot of the things that we wanted to do. And we got on this call beginning of March or middle of March as everything is shutting down, and we started scratching our heads and said, you know, it'd be a real shame to just throw in the towel. And I don't remember who it was that threw out the term, well, let's just do it online. Everybody else is taking everything on Zoom. There is a real concern, obviously, for Zoom fatigue and how much you are, you know, on a screen. Those are real concerns. You know, obviously someone who's signing up to do this understands what it is that they're going to be doing ahead of time.
Yeah.
But I think the idea was recognizing that this new scenario that COVID-19 has presented to us gave us the opportunity to rethink assumptions. I never would have thought of doing an internship, summer internship virtually. It just wouldn't even have crossed my mind. But now with COVID-19, all of a sudden we have the opportunity to innovate, think outside the box, and lo and behold, here we are with a plan in place.
Yeah. No, and to me, it's a beautiful thing to, in the midst of a harsh, terrible time, to say, okay, God, so what are you doing? You haven't abandoned us. So I assume then you just didn't decide, let's take the summer off, and hope next year will be better. Good. So, and for Ted, you know, what was the motivation in the back of your mind in moving to this format?
Well, very similar to what Omar really just shared there, is that we've done these so long, and they've been so effective, it just seemed a shame to throw in the towel and just say, well, let's write off the summer. You know, can we keep the ball moving in some way? Can we continue to give people some connections to and exposure to church planting as they might be at a stage in their seminary training or otherwise, where they're trying to think through, could church planting be for me? Is this something I'm cut out to do? So what we've tried to do is come up with some sort of format here that would give people through virtual training and maybe even an element of practicum, a way to continue to move the ball down the field and not just simply write off the summer.
Yeah, good. I have a question here about how do you identify potential interns? Through seminaries or the M&A Assessment Center? Where are you looking to find these interns?
Yes, pretty much wherever we can find them.
Under any rock, just go in the street corners. Okay.
Well, the most immediate place is those who have come through the Readiness Seminar at the seminaries. That's the...
You just used a term there, the Readiness Seminar. I was asking about the assessment. Is there a difference between those two? Some of our people may not know the difference.
Oh, okay. Well, just very quickly, the Readiness Seminar is like a mini assessment done on a Friday night, Saturday, usually at seminary campuses, but lately we've expanded that to include others in a given region or area. Assistant pastors, campus staff, whoever might be thinking about church planting down the road. And so this assessment center just gives an initial preliminary feedback to somebody about whether this might be a path they'd want to continue walking down or begin to walk down. Assessment is more towards the end of that path, at least potentially, where they get a more comprehensive, intense assessment experience that has a little bit more definitive feedback for them. And at that point, they might be ready to move into an apprenticeship or move right to into church planting, depending on what kind of feedback and their level of readiness. So the internship or the Readiness Seminar is more of an early assessment tool to hopefully get people into what you might call that pipeline.
Yeah, and that's offered on like Covenant, and RTS Orlando has done it. Charlotte's done it. Has Gordon Conwell done a readiness yet?
We've not, but we are having conversations with them, and hopefully we'll have one in the not too distant future.
Okay, well, good. Yeah, having that distinction is helpful. Good.
And Chris, I would also add that for us, we want to take even a step back to open the pipeline up even a little bit more. And so what we've said for the New England internship is anyone who's in some sort of theological education and is interested in doing ministry and church planting in New England, because we'd love to begin to develop relationships earlier and earlier with those who would be interested in serving over the long term with us. So it's a little bit broader, but not too much.
Good.
And that's where I think there is a good application for this, is that it doesn't just have to be for people who are thinking that they themselves will be church planters. Maybe they're thinking they might like to be part of a church planting team, or even if they go on into pastoral ministry or some other capacity beyond just planting, we hope that they would have some awareness of, exposure to, and become a champion of church planting wherever they have some influence to bring to bear in their church or presbytery or whatever. So I hope it has a broader appeal as well.
Yeah, so they're not signing in blood that they must now go and plant a church if they do an 8-week. It's a good testing ground.
Right.
Last year we had here in Boston a seminary student who came to do a summer internship with us, and he was trying to discern in the midst of that, felt a general interest in New England as a region, but was trying to think, do I want to do church planting? Do I want to go the route of campus ministry? And so we gave him opportunities to interact with campus ministries up here in New England as a part of his internship, so he could test that out. So we try to be flexible to where the interests of the particular candidate are, to what it is that they want to do.
Cool. Well, we have some other questions, but before we get to those, let's each of you talk about your respective virtual summer internships. What are the components? You don't go down too deep into the weeds, but give us a good overview of how you have it structured, because what's neat is each one of yours has its own unique qualities and opportunities, plus you're in your own unique context. So would Bob, would you kind of share with us New England, and then Ted talk about?
Sure. Yeah. And I'll let if Omar wants to fill in some of the gaps as well. Yeah. He's the one who's done the primary design work on ours.
Well, but you take the credit, and then pass it on. Okay. Yeah, you guys can tag team.
It includes 3 kind of umbrella components, right, that we always want to try to include in all of our training and apprenticeship, internship things. That there's ministry skill, there's theological conviction, and there's character. And these are, 3 dynamics that we want to play off of into each training opportunity. So part of the time here will be in cohort meetings where they're interacting with other interns over a subject topic that we work through over the summer. In this case, it'll probably be oriented around calling and church planting. There'll be coaching, because we expect interns to come in with some learning objectives that they may have defined already in a readiness seminar, or they may have on their own, such as, what does it look like for me to deepen my prayer life, or what does evangelism look like? There'll be exposure to a variety of practitioners on the field here. So we want to let them interact with existing church planters and pastors. And part of that'll be contextual exposure, but part of it will be practical ministry. So those are a few different things that we're doing.
Okay, good. Ted, and then, or Omar, if you want to fill in.
I was going to say, if Omar, you want to.
No, he did an excellent job. And so the one thing that we also, and I don't know if Ted is doing this or not, but the one other component that we do is to flesh out a little bit more is we introduce our interns to the intercultural development inventory, which is a tool that helps to assess the level of intercultural competence that a leader has. We think that especially as someone is moving generally from other parts of the country and they come up here to New England, that cultural intelligence or intercultural competence is really an important skill for them to have and develop. And so we want to, from the beginning of our interaction with them, we want them to know that that's something that we value and that we're willing to help them think through and invest in them to grow in.
Okay, good. Good. Yeah.
Ted, are you guys using the IDI at all?
No, we are going to do some intercultural training there, which would hopefully lead into that at some point, but we weren't going to necessarily include that in our particular program.
I was going to add in my own way that being having adopted the Midwest for the last 33 years, there is no culture in the Midwest. There, I said that and it's now recorded and we know it's not true. Ted, now that I said that and made that awkward moment, would you tell us about what the Midwest, with its variety of great differences in cultures and people groups, what is the internship going to look like in the Midwest?
Right. Well, we've decided to give it two primary elements. One will be the virtual training that is done online, and anybody can take that who wants to anywhere. Over a period of 8 weeks, twice a week, we'll meet together. We'll have some teaching about what is involved in church planting, what does that actually look like, helping folks therefore get some idea with their wives, hopefully, to say, okay, what is actually involved in this? And could this be something that fits me? And then, like Bob and Omar pointed out, helping them think through the issue of calling. How do you discern if this might be you? What are the qualities and characteristics involved in being a church planter? And how might you invest in developing those qualities over the period of the next several years before you maybe end up in church planting? So we'll have a lot of that kind of teaching and calling, and then as part of that, we'll also have regular interviews with current church planters, getting a chance to interview them, talk with them about their particular experience and their wives as well, to be able to say, okay, so how did you feel called to church planting? How did that work out? How did you decide where to go or what opportunity to take? How did that come about? How did that transition go? How was fundraising for you? How have you gathered people? What have you done with them? Kind of thing. What are the challenges that you have faced and how have you addressed those challenges? Those kinds of questions. So that'll all be part of the virtual aspect, and that's Tuesday and Thursday afternoons from 1 to 3 o'clock Central Time. Then the second aspect is the practicum, and that's a pretty ambitious effort on our part, that we want people to get some exposure to the nuts and bolts of actually planting a church. And this can be done virtually by linking up with one of the church planters on a weekly basis, a regular basis, participating in their core group meetings virtually. If they're having worship services or other gatherings, participating in those. If they're going to have a chance to preach or lead some of those meetings as well. If they are meeting on site at some point during the course of the summer in June and July, depending on the location, some are opening up faster than others, they can actually have the opportunity to do something on site as well. So I'm interacting right now, for example, with a Covenant student interested in the possibility of doing some on-site work here in Chicago. So he might drive up to Chicago for 2 or 3 times over the course of this 8-week period and spend several days with the church planter and in some of the meetings that they might be able to have. And they might be able to do that in other locations. We've got about 6 or 8 church planters who would love to have either virtual, on-site, or a blend of both for their practicum portion. But the practicum part is just all about actually doing church planting and becoming involved in that, either virtually or on site. It'll be custom designed each time according to where that planter is and who the student is and what their availability is. We'll custom design each one.
Yeah, that's great. Now, and I think I heard you mention it, Ted, and maybe Omar, Bob, you had said, what about spouses, their engagement? Can they, if they're doing this online, are they able to participate in one way or the other?
We would love for single men, single women, married couples to participate in this. We feel like a lot of the nuts and bolts that we're working through are things that, regardless of what ministry you're being called to, are going to be beneficial. Obviously, there's a particular slant towards church planting, but I don't think, at least in New England, it's not so slanted towards that someone who was thinking about ministry in another context would feel like, oh, this isn't for me at all. There's a great opportunity here to learn some basic skills, be introduced to new regions of the country virtually. That I think is really, again, COVID-19 has presented us with something that's really unique, and I'm excited to test it out and see how it works. But yeah, anybody we would welcome, and in fact, for some of what we're hoping to do, we would love to have the spouses involved.
Okay, good.
Right, I would just echo what Omar just said in all of that. I think one of the things we're finding that with a lot of our church plants, I mean, some people thought our church plants would just kind of go on hold until the pandemic passed. But a lot of our church planters have said it's actually accelerated their ability to connect with people throughout their communities. And they're finding lots of creative ways to be doing outreach, connecting with people, ministering to people. There's a lot to be learned for ministry in general, not just whether you go into church planting or not. And I think it can be a very helpful, very invigorating experience.
Good. A couple questions from Thurman Williams here. He was asking, are the panelists having internships that are year-round, multiple years, as well as summer internships? So what have your thoughts been about that?
So Christ the King is privileged to be in pretty close proximity to two Gordon Conwell campuses. And so if students from Gordon Conwell are on campus, we are attending our churches rather, then oftentimes the relationship they end up having is very similar to an internship. While it's not a formal internship, it mirrors a lot of those dynamics. We do have church planting residents that we have year round, and those we're regularly recruiting for new residents to join what we're doing up here. And again, those are church planting, but also broader ministry. So right now we've got one resident that is what came in thinking, yeah, I want to plant a church. Another one that came in thinking, I'm not sure. We've got two more that we're in conversation with right now to bring on. So we open those up again to just anybody, any man or woman that wants to learn ministry, learn ministry by practicing ministry, by doing ministry. We welcome them to come and talk to us about that.
Right. And yeah, with internships, we'd love to have them annually. As a matter of fact, very often in the past, summer internships have been a wonderful stepping stone or catalyst into long-term internships. In the years where we were actually sending people off to the West Coast or to the East Coast or wherever for internships, some of them actually never came back to seminary. They stayed where they were and signed on for an ongoing internship there and finished their seminary educations virtually, or after they graduated, they then went to the place that they did an internship and just kind of picked up where they left off. Just about every church planter I've talked to would love to have not just a summer intern, but a year-round intern. It would be such an asset for them and their ministry. A man, woman, just anybody who wants to get that kind of not only practical experience, but to be a real assistant in the planting of a church. There's a real strategic role to play in so many different capacities. I mean, discipleship, administration, outreach, you name it, there can be any number of opportunities. So we would love to see long-term internships continue to come out of the summer internships or even to be developed on their own.
So along those lines, kind of, I'm a church planter, sell me on getting an intern, because I don't know, I hear they're more work than they produce. You know, come on, they're needy. I don't want to be bothered. but in all seriousness, why would I want that if I'm a church planter? What's the advantage immediately, and what's the advantage to the broader system of where you're planting and the area you're seeking to reach?
Well, Mark, Bob, I'll let you take a shot at that.
Yeah, I think, Chris, I mean, that's not an uncommon perspective, you know, oh, this is going to be more work for me. But this is also a kingdom activity, right? So equipping those who are coming behind us to prepare them for ministry, to take our places in the future and to see the kingdom grow and expand is really, I think, part of the discipleship responsibility of every pastor and elder. That being said, interns can be incredibly practically helpful. They can do all kinds of tasks that you might not have the time to do. They could explore new places. They could drill down into new communities. They can help you build relationships with people that you just haven't had a chance to do that yet. And the investment on the part of the pastor or the church planter is, you know, at least in the case of a summer intern, it's relatively small and there's a short window. So there's a big kingdom bang for the buck, but there's also the possibility of a really nice little extra help around the plant over the course of the summer.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I can see with it too is you're really getting an 8-week interview process. You know, when you're looking for someone to come in when they're done with seminary to plant a church, and you have them for a weekend, you get them for a weekend, and we all know how well we can behave for a weekend. But on that repeated cycle, even if it's online, if you can actually, you begin to get to know them. And but both of you guys, your systems have some great points. It's not just imparting information, but you're engaging them. And so it's if I would think for a church planter or an M&A committee and a presbytery, this is a great opportunity to do, you know, really a very low cost, long running interview.
Well, and Chris, yeah. I think you just made also a really important point too. For a church plant that wants to be a church planting church, having interns is a great way to set yourself up to do that. If your vision is to not just plant a church, but to plant a church planting church, then part of that vision has to be raising up the men and women who are going to go plant those churches. It can't just be, well, we're going to sit passively back and cherry pick the cream of the crop from the nearest seminary in order to plant. We need to have a mindset that says we're developing the leaders that we're preparing to plant in these contexts. I think part of what you've done in Wisconsin is exactly that. It's right. Raising up the leaders within the system.
Yeah. I mean, what do you think it communicates to that core group or young church that's still a mission church when they see an intern come in?
So I think a part of what it communicates is that we're committed to the next generation of the church. We're committed to raising up leaders, that we have a mindset that we're not here for ourselves, but that we're here for future generations of people that we may never know. You know, an intern may very well stick around and plant a church down the street, but that intern just as likely could go to the other side of the country. And the impact of in the kingdom that you'll have by walking alongside an intern when they're making mistakes, when they're learning, when they preach a bad sermon, and also when they lead someone to the Lord, right? When they disciple someone in the church, like when you're walking alongside with them in those successes and failures of ministry, you're making a really significant impact and investment in the kingdom.
That's great.
And on top of all of that, that you've said, I have not yet talked to a church planter who isn't really eager to have one of these interns, summer or otherwise, come alongside. As much as we like planting in teams, very often these planters go out by themselves. Because there's just not enough people able and willing to go with them. And they see a partner in this, and someone who really is going to help them do many of the things that Bob was describing. and just maybe even give them a bit of a break here and there so that they will lead a meeting or two or preach a sermon or two or something like that. So in addition to all of that, in terms of a kingdom investment, I think almost every planter that I've interacted with over the course of the years has been eager to and then was very grateful to have had them.
Yeah, that's good. Well, another question here, and this one was directed to you, Omar, saying a word about Made to Flourish. Are there other organizations out there who also fund, train, and promote pastoral residencies?
Yeah, so the background to that is that this is slightly different than the main thing that we're talking about now. We're talking now about virtual summer internships. But for those who are interested in doing starting a pastoral residency program, Made to Flourish is a national organization that does a lot of great work with in the conversation of faith work and economic wisdom. They fund several new residency programs every year. And so if your church is interested in starting its residency program, Made to Flourish can be a source of funding for, but not just funding. In fact, when I get off this call, the next call I'm jumping on is the meeting of the residency coordinators for Made to Flourish. So there's a community of other pastors and church leaders that are doing this work together. So you get the funding, but you also get the community of other people that are doing this to help you. If anybody wants information about that, they can contact me directly, and I'll put them in touch with the right people at Made to Flourish.
Great. All right. That's good to know, because we hear that term thrown around there in the organization. They do a lot of great stuff. Is there any particular curriculum that you guys are using or have designed, and can it be borrowed?
Well, I'm happy to let anybody see our syllabus.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, we are going to have some articles for people to read that I think are going to be very helpful for them, and we'll process these articles together. There are going to be some portions of books that I think are helpful because of the particular topics, like how to discern calling, kind of thing, and am I a church planter? And we're going to use some tools that have been used before. For example, what's called the 21 questions that Alan Thompson provided years ago for people just really early on to kind of work your way through these questions and try to get a feel, depending on your answers, as to whether church planting might be for you, kind of thing. So there'll be all of those kind of elements brought into the mix. It won't be like a real standard curriculum per se, like you'd have for a seminary class. Stay away from that. But we'll have articles and some elements of books for us to read and process together.
Okay, good. Some of the other questions here. Are internships able to be in other places besides, it says Metro Boston, but you guys are really looking at New England for Bob and Omar, right? So
We are.
Yeah. So let me just ask you on that level. So you've been focused on Boston, and that's been but now you're part of the New England Church Planting Network. Who else is involved in the New England Church Planting Network? And again, I won't get snarky or I'm from the East Coast, so I can get really sarcastic, and I've got to kind of pull back. Are there towns other than Boston and New England? I know. What else? Why are you thinking New England and not just Boston with this?
Yeah, so New England, the Church Planting Network is made up of churches throughout southern and northern New England. There are 2 presbyteries here, and there are a handful of participating churches. A lot of the good work in church planting over the years, at least recently, has been done in New England, in Boston and New Haven, and some of the other kind of coastal areas. But there are large swaths of New England in the interior areas, especially that are suburban to rural, where church planting isn't as sexy as it is in the city. And so really our hope is to develop a pipeline of planters that would go to those places eventually as well, not just want to come to places like Boston. And we feel like New England has a ton of diversity culturally, and socioeconomically and geographically. And there's a place in New England for just about every interest that anyone would have in church planting. So that's the idea, to kind of broaden the scope a little bit and partner with our brothers throughout the two presbyteries to open things up.
Good. Yeah, and Ted, so you're the one with the Midwest Alliance. You're looking at what, 14 or 15 presbyteries covering the large swath of the central part of the country. So but what if somebody is in Tupelo but wants to participate? Are they now they're going to get a Midwestern feel, right? If they participate in that, but it's not just.
Well, one of the ways in which people could actually sign up as we've been interacting about this. They could sign up to do the virtual portion, which will be talking a lot about church planting generally, no matter where you are. If they are from Tupelo or any other part of the country, they could work maybe with Clint Wilkie and the Mid-South Network to put together the practicum portion right there, but plug in and take the virtual portion if they wanted to. So the virtual can be done by anybody anywhere in the country. And we already have actually a couple of people signing up for that from different parts of the country. They could do a practicum in the Midwest if somehow that could be worked out, but there's no reason they can't put together a practicum, and working with Jim Hatch, help them put together that practicum in other places. So this way, hopefully there can be collaboration between regions. In this way, we can each bring something to the table that helps all of us move down the field. But then with our own church planters, and we have a variety of contexts. I mean, we have church planters in Chicago, St. Louis, and Indianapolis who would love to have an intern. But we also have them in smaller towns like Omaha and Terre Haute and Cedar Rapids, Elkhart, Indiana, you name it, that would love to have an intern. So there could be a variety of contexts that people could, that they will hear from in the virtual, but they can also connect with in terms of practicum if it fits what they want to do.
Again, what I love and what I'm seeing here is the collaborative nature of, you guys in New England kind of got it started, so, hey, that's a great idea. We can do it. And I'd love to see this spread, other networks and presbyteries, taking on, just take what we've done and make it better, and we'll all learn from it. And then the other thing we were talking about, you're calling this a summer virtual internship. Have you had any thoughts about a fall virtual internship, or a winter, or whatever it might be, or any thoughts brewing? Again, we're all reacting to the situation here, but wanting to be proactive. Any thoughts with something beyond just this present summer? I'm not asking you to commit to anything.
Yeah, I was talking to somebody this past week about our internship here, and they asked me, they said, hey, the summer is kind of hard for me. I'm taking some classes online. The fall would actually be a lot better. And I had to stop and scratch my head. I was like, yeah, if we're doing this virtually, there's really no reason why it has to only be summer. Summer has been the time we've done them simply because that's when seminary students are generally available to travel. This, again, opportunity to innovate here has created a scenario where we really do have the flexibility of doing these a lot more regularly. So I don't know, we'll see. I mean, I'm certainly open to it. If there's interest, I would definitely be open to doing it.
Well, that was the same experience that we've been having as well, that as we've been working on this summer internship thing that's going to be primarily virtual, most likely, there have been a number of guys who are doing campus ministry, for example, with CO or RUF or CCO or Crew or whatever. We've made a lot of those connections around the region, and they all have summer training that's going on that doesn't really make a summer internship all that feasible for them. But several have pointed out the same thing they did, Omar, that they pointed out to you. Actually, if you did this during the academic year, that would work out a whole lot better for me than doing it during the summer. So that is now starting us to think, well, let's see how this summer thing goes. And we very well may see us doing this virtually over the course of the next academic year. And we may learn some lessons, reconfigure things, who knows?
Yeah, so how are you going to be matching intern to church where there is going to be a connection with a specific church? Is there criteria? Does the intern pick? Does the church planner pick? What does the process of matching look like?
Well, for us, for example, it takes an interview with each one of the students to figure that out. So I've already talked to a whole bunch of them. Jim Hatch has talked to several guys as well. There's one guy, for example, who's thinking he wants to actually maybe with MTW or otherwise go back to London and plant a church there. So he would like more of an urban experience while he is here. So we're interacting with him about something in Chicago that he might be able to do during his internship now, or even a little bit later on when things open up a little bit. There's another guy who's thinking he wants to plant in sort of a rural Midwestern community. So we're thinking that we've talked to some church planters who are planting in that kind of a context, who would love to have him be an intern with them for the summer. So it's one of these things of get to know. We don't have so many of them involved at this point, that let's just figure out what each one is thinking, what kind of context whether they plant or not, what kind of context they would see themselves in potentially in the future. And then let's try to match that off with their practicum experience.
Okay, good. We got about 10 minutes left before we begin to have to wrap up. We haven't gotten to the most important question, of course, not the impact of the kingdom or my development and sense of calling. How much time is this going to take, and what is it going to cost? I mean, really, we got to get down to brass tacks. But really, what are you thinking? How much time? What's the investment if you're doing 8 weeks? Is this a 40-hour week? Am I going to spend 40 hours on a Zoom call? And also, what's the cost?
That was obviously a big consideration for us when you move here, right? It's just a different experience. You're living in the area, you're meeting people, you're on the internship 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for the time that you're here. And it's tempting. It was tempting for us to try to replicate that fully, and we just realized like it's not possible. And so what we're going to try is about 8 hours a week, and the syllabus that we have will alternate between cohort meetings, and then this goes back to the earlier question about how they're going to be interacting with leaders in our context. We're putting together Zoom calls where they're going to be able to talk to different church planters, people that are doing ministry in different contexts. As Bob alluded to, people that are doing ministry in a small New England town, that's a different type of ministry than if you're planting a church in Boston. And that's different than if you're planting a church. The second largest city in New England is Worcester, and Worcester is a very different city from Boston in many respects. So we're going to try to introduce to a lot of people. The cost is $750, but the New England Church Planting Network is subsidizing most of that. So what an intern would have to pay is $250, and a lot of that is just to pay for the curriculum we're going to use, the IDI. It's all paying for things that we have to pay in order for us to be able to use as well.
Ted, as far as Midwest goes?
Yeah, as far as time goes, it depends on whether you do the virtual aspect, the practicum aspect, both, and then what degree of the practicum. So the virtual portion, the time commitment is Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, 1 to 3 o'clock. So 4 hours a week over 8 weeks. That's the virtual portion. That's 32 hours spread out over 8 weeks. If the practicum is custom designed, if you live in the town that you want to do a practicum in, you could do that almost all through the course of the week. If you need to limit that, or if you need to travel somewhere and need to limit it, so it'll be custom designed. each time. The total cost for us, because our situation and what we're offering is a little bit different, is actually $500 per intern. And then if you have been through the Readiness Seminar, and this would apply for New England as well, that if you've been through the Readiness Seminar, then you would also get funding that would be available that could pay for half of the virtual. So the student would pay for maybe $250 and they get the other half covered for the virtual. And then the practicum, we would work out on each situation to get most of those expenses covered. If there were any housing or travel or other needs that might be met, we'd work with Jim Hatch with the church planter development with M&A and with these internship funds that M&A manages, then we would apply those to the practicum aspect as needed. So a proposal would be put together, especially for the practicum. What would that involve? What would the expenses be? And then up to $5,000 could be potentially applied to that. So most of any out-of-pocket expenses might come out of the virtual in that regard.
Good. I think I've heard all three of you mention, but there was a question about it that's to make a bit more clear. When we think of intern, we usually think of one person going to one church and working with one pastor. One of the values with a virtual internship is having a bit more multiplicity.
Right.
The question was, is there a cohort construct in here? So will these interns be able to have any interaction with the other interns? Because in a normal internship, they could be spread all over New England. They may not really see each other or interact. You want to talk about that, the cohort of component of your summer internships or virtual internships?
For us, the cohort piece is a key aspect of the summer internship. I mean, it's one of the core components. So the idea of interns learning alongside one another and interacting with each other is absolutely part of what we're trying to do.
Good.
Omar, did you want to?
No, yeah, the only thing I was going to add to that is that even outside of the cohort, when we have them interacting with pastors in the region, that's also going to be a cohort style opportunity for them to interact.
And the very setup of the virtual sessions that we're doing, as we cover certain material about this is what church planting looks like, or interview a active church planter or something, each of those segments don't go any longer than 45 minutes to an hour, so that we can spend the rest of the time processing this together and interacting with one another. So that kind of interactive experience is fundamental to what we're hoping to see accomplished.
And the next part of the question, Ted, is a little awkward. We talk about curriculum and cohorts. Is there any other thing you might want to add with that? He asked.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah. Well, one of the partnerships we have in this, again, showing the collaborative nature, is that we want to work with Next Gen. And so you and Next Gen will be offering 3 modules during this as part of the virtual component on the soft skills of ministry, and particularly soft skills that we think have great relevance to church planting in particular and a ministry in general. Whether it's being in pastoral community and what does that look like, or time management, just learning how to manage your time can sometimes be a challenge. So for example, in church planting, one of the big differences that you find from established ministry is that in established ministry, you can go, you wake up every morning and you probably have more to do than you know what to do. You've got meetings to attend, you got sermons to prepare, you got people to visit, all sorts of stuff that's going on, more than you can fit into the course of the day. In the early stages of church planting especially, you might wake up in the morning and say, what am I going to do today? Because you're going to have to create almost every single day as a church planter, with connections you're going to make and follow through and everything else. Over time, as ministry builds, it becomes a little bit more of a rhythm and a routine. But part of what makes church planting is the unpredictable and creative nature of what is involved. So what does time management look like, not just in general, but what does it look like in a church planting context there? So these sort of things that NextGen provides are going to be an integral part of what we do.
Yeah, a little shameless self-promotion never hurts. Because we're going to get to that to the rest of you. But yeah, no, so to answer the one question I think from Matt is, yeah, there for all of these, both these internships, there is definitely a cohort component to it. Well, we got a few minutes left, so I want to ask first New England and then Midwest. So just give me 2 minutes. Why is the hand of God at work in New England, making it the center where people want to be in the center of what God is doing right now? So we talked about the internships, but tell me, why do I want to be a part of New England? 2 minutes.
Wow, that's a huge, huge, you know, New England historically has been the place from which the rest of the country derived its ministers. The gospel, you know, came here and flowed throughout the rest of the country as folks traveled south and west. But that was hundreds of years ago. And New England today is a place with deep spiritual voids. That doesn't mean that God's not at work here. He's tremendously at work here, building and growing his church. But the needs are profound. So, you know, our hope with the New England Church Planting Network and also with Christ the King in Boston is to see God's kingdom expressed through the planting of churches grow throughout this place in ways that, you know, kind of cut against the grain of the historical attrition of the church in this part of the country. There are tons, I mean, this is true across the country, but particularly in New England, there are tons of people who have never set foot in a church. The part of the cultural language of New England is that, you know, people don't have the same norms and values related to church attendance and history. They might have, you know, they might be post-Roman Catholic and maybe their grandparents were Christian or at least went to church, not so much for younger folks. So we're really praying for and longing for God to do a big work here, because we believe that not only are the fields ripe for harvest, but also there's a tremendous need and work, need for laborers. So in a nutshell, I think, you know, that's our pitch for New England. There's a lot of great churches here, a lot of great pastors from around the country, and it's a really fun place to live.
Yeah. Thank you. And Ted, 2 minutes. What's so great about the Midwest? Why? How is God at work?
Well, such a large, diverse region. We're talking 14 states or so, for everything from really big cities to mid-sized towns to rural communities of all kinds. You've got 71 million people in this region, and over 60 million of them aren't going to church anywhere at any time. And even though the Midwest is known as the heartland of America, it now lists as the 10th largest mission field in the world of just sheer unchurched people at this point in time, with all different kinds of ethnic and socioeconomic diversity. We've identified 150 locations that just immediately we want to see churches planted. And so, as Bob and Omar have articulated, the real challenge is laborers for the harvest. We need more men and women who will be a part of church planting enterprise. So whether it is New England or whether it's the Midwest region or some other place, this is one of the real challenges that we have as a denomination and as the Church of Jesus Christ, to be producing men and women who have a missional posture to the communities all around us. And that's what these internships are ultimately designed to do, is to produce laborers for this really vast and diverse harvest.
Well, thanks, guys. Appreciate it. For those who've been attending, I will be sending out to you the PDFs of the that they have for their various works. They'll look better than just what I ran off here. You'll be getting that in an email in probably a couple days. But we are so glad you're able to join us. This church planting and renewal conversations format we've been doing the last 4 or 5 weeks. It's going to be melded into M&A's Thursday webinar starting May 28th. So we'll be having this kind of format, and starting May 28th, we'll be talking about regathering with regard to youth, or I'm sorry, to children on May 28th. I'll be hosting it with a panel of a variety of churches around the country with Stephen Estock from CDM. Then on June 4th, we'll look at youth and regathering. What are the considerations? We'll then talk on the 11th, talk about the church, COVID, and compassion, about mercy ministry during this time. What does it look like? And then starting later in June, the last 2 weeks of June, we'll be doing a broader thing about regathering, lessons learned, as some of our churches have opened, have learned lessons, what's working, what's not, what are the surprises, and so that as the rest of us are continuing on, so that we can keep learning from each other and having these conversations. And as always, M&A is here to strengthen the church, to serve, grow, and multiply. And if you have any thoughts or other items you'd like to see discussed, please reach out to me at chrisvogel@ngpastors.com or cvogel@pcanet.org. And so again, we'd like to thank you. God bless and have a good day.